Let me introduce our guest. Jamal Wakim is a professor of international relations at the Lebanese University, who joins us live from Beirut, and Tim Anderson is the director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies, who joins us from Sindhi. Welcome to you both. Jamal Wakim, when we take a look at what has happened over here, there was a time where Israel would not make an announcement that it's going to go and assassinate leaders of any group, let alone, in this case, the Islamic Jihad movement. But it's now become out in the open. They made the threat and they're following through with it. Now, the question I have for you is, why do you think they're following through with it now, given all the different, perhaps, challenges that Israel is facing?
Well, I believe that this is part of exporting the crisis. The government of Netanyahu is facing mounting opposition from inside the Zionist society due to its attempts to amend the law and subdue the Supreme Israeli Court to the Knesset authority. So there is a mounting opposition. This is why Netanyahu is trying to run away from this internal crisis by creating tension in the occupied territories, by mounting the crackdown on the Israeli resistance movement in the West Bank, and by trying to target especially al-Jihad al-Islami, the Islamic Jihad leaders, because he's trying also to cause a rift between the Jihad and Hamas, which has been hesitant in the past 2 years to go on a full-scale confrontation with the Israelis, as it was pressured by Egypt. So it's also an attempt to cause discord between Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, because I believe that the Islamic Jihad will will retaliate, and it's expected that it will retaliate this evening, while Hamas is a bit hesitant to go on a full-scale confrontation with Israel so far.
All right. Well, Tim Anderson, we do hear this quite often, as our guests there mentioned, that Israel, because of its own internal crises that it's facing, is perhaps, as to use Jamal Wakim's word, to export this crisis out, and has attacked the Gaza Strip, and in this case, in point, assassinated the leaders. But isn't that also risky? Wouldn't that also work against Israel, because you're having the internal crisis, which is quite serious in terms of perhaps many saying that this is going to lead to the ouster of this particular cabinet. But couldn't this approach, where ultimately it would lead to instability for Israel, also backfire?
Yes, well, but of course the Netanyahu regime is backed into a corner at the moment. It is very paranoid. As your other guest said, it's feeling threatened by the internal revolt, effectively, which is really mainly designed to keep Netanyahu out of jail and to give his government control over the judiciary. He also, or members of his government, not least his son, have also accused the Biden administration of trying to overthrow the Netanyahu government. So there's a serious pressure. Then you have the relative unification of resistance factions. Okay, there may be some rivalry in Gaza, but there's also been a unification of resistance factions on the West Bank. So there's been significant resistance activities, daily activities, which are putting pressure on that government. So, of course, there's going to be contradictions. Of course, there's going to be risks in what they do. But I think that one of the principal motivations is to try and survive, or have Netanyahu survive his the pressures that he's under domestically, and including from his key sponsor in the US.
When you take a look, Jamal Wakim, at the way that Israel has reacted in this particular instant, it came 5 days after the death in the Israeli jail of Khader Adnan. We know that there was a skirmishes that went on, but Israel agreed to a ceasefire. So do you feel like Israel really doesn't want to get engaged militarily, and maybe even from Netanyahu? I don't know, I'm speculating here, but as some have said, that was a weak stance for the agreement to a ceasefire, and therefore we've seen this 5-day lapse, and that's why now we're seeing Israel to carry out. Do you think Israel, in hindsight, thought, okay, it wasn't to Israel's advantage to agree to that ceasefire, and therefore we're seeing what has occurred now with the attack on the Gaza Strip?
Well, I believe that there is a tendency for escalation by the Israeli leadership, and it was best expressed in not, let's say, freeing Sheikh Khudr Adnan, who is leader of the Islamic Jihad, and this caused his death after 2 months of hunger strike. So this government didn't want to give, let's say, or grant freedom for Sheikh Khudr Adnan, despite the fact that it was not, it knew that he was going to die, because they want to escalate the situation. They don't want to, let's say, mend fences or quote unquote give any concession to the Palestinian prisoners or the Palestinian resistance movement. They knew that they wanted a reaction by the Palestinians that would lead to a full-scale confrontation. The Palestinians were a bit, let's say, controlling themselves. They didn't go into a reaction regarding the death of Sheikh Khudr Adnan. That's why the Israelis went on to attack Gaza in an attempt also to drive the Palestinians to react. And I believe that the Israelis are trying to go on a full-scale confrontation at a time when they see that their relations, the Netanyahu relations with Biden administration aren't that good. So they are trying to blackmail the American administration. At the same time, the weak reaction by Arab countries, by Arab states, at the time being gives free hand for Israel to act, and they count on divisions among the ranks and of the Israeli resistance movements to cause discord between them. This is what they are counting on.
All right, let's take a look at another angle here, if you agree, Tim Anderson, with this. And, you know, you're taking a look at a cabinet that some have described to be filled with fascists. And we know that... Sorry about that. We know the extreme views that some of these so-called ministers have, Tim Anderson, like the one that everybody at this point may have now be familiar with the name. It's Marvin Gavir. Are we looking at an extreme cabinet that wants to just wipe away the Palestinian issue once and for all? Because if you really take a look at what they're doing, the statements which many said was kept amongst themselves is now out in the open. Like this Ben Gavir, who said, if anybody who stands up against Israel should be executed, in reference to the Palestinians. You can't wave a Palestinian flag. And many other things, like Smoltrich, another minister who has said, who called a few weeks back for the wiping away of a town. Do you see them wanting to just do away with the Palestinian issue based on some of the actions that they have taken? Tim Anderson? Okay. Doesn't seem like we have Tim Anderson. We're going to cross on over to Ola Alassi, who's our correspondent over in Gaza City, to find out what's going on there. Well, Ola Alassi, give us the latest of what you got. Based on the information that we have, this was a major operation that took place where it involved, from what we understand, 40 aircrafts and drones.
Yes. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. As we have seen and witnessed this morning, we have our Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have faced a serious and intense airstrikes by the Israeli drones. About 40 air drones have targeted several places and sites in the Gaza City along this strip, and these airstrikes led to the death of 12 Palestinians and 3 commanders of the Islamic Jihad movement, and these military and political leaders were assassinated in the residential buildings. As we can see, one of them was assassinated in the residential building just behind me, and the commanders were Tariq Izzuddin, Jihad Al-Ghanim, and Khalil Al-Bahtini. And the death toll, according to the Ministry of Health, rising to the 12 mortars so far, and about 20 people and civilians were injured in these airstrikes. The Ministry of Health has said that among the civilians and the mortars were civilians, and 4 of them were children and 6 were women so far, and the 9 other civilians are like family members and people and civilians, Palestinian civilians from the family, and people were like around the place there in the area of the targeting. They have targeted 2 residential buildings in the middle of the Gaza Strip, as you can see just behind me, and one in the southern the southern of the Gaza Strip, which in Rafah, and as we can so far, there is a cautious calm in the place, and no other Israeli airstrikes targeted another place in the Gaza Strip, and the resistance factions didn't respond to this military aggression so far, but they asserted that they are going to respond in serious and in a way that the Palestinian resistance they only can determine how the response will be to this Israeli assassination of the Islamic Jihad leaders.
All right, you mentioned the building behind you. Were there any other buildings that were targeted? Are we looking at many to have been injured? Because again, the depth of the airstrikes in terms of the number of drones and military aircraft was quite high, 40 of them, as I mentioned.
Yes, according to the media reports, there were another airstrikes that targeted the southern of the Gaza Strip, and another, as they claim, they were military sites belonging to Islamic Jihad movement. So civilians were injured, and in the airstrikes of the assassination operation that the Israeli military launched this morning, the building just behind me, where Tariq Izzuddin, commander of the Islamic Jihad, was residing there, and another building was in Rafah, to the southern of the Gaza Strip.
Thank you very much for that. Ola Al-Assi from Gaza City, a correspondent. Be safe. All right, let's go back to Jamal Wakim, if we have him, hopefully. Professor of International Relations at Lebanese University. Jamal Wakim, actually, Tim Anderson, I see you, and I had a question for you before we got cut off, so I'll go to you. Sorry, Jamal, I'll come back to you. Tim Anderson, taking a look at Israel's stance, many have said, such as the Iranian Foreign Ministry that made a statement that in order to hide its weaknesses, it has gone and done what it did regarding the assassination of these 3 Islamic Jihad leaders. Why would, if you agree with the Iranian stance, why is Israel on a weak footing?
Well, the weakness we mentioned before is that they've been very divided, because Netanyahu has lost a lot of support amongst his own constituency. But I mean, we'll be looking at these assaults on the Gaza Strip. This is another in a series where the recklessness, the disregard for life is absolutely characteristic of Israeli governments, succession of Israeli governments, basically. From what the details we're getting now, it sounds about the same, that while they may be highlighting the killing of some resistance fighters, at least 3/4 of the others are civilians. And that was the case in the very large-scale assaults on Gaza back in earlier years, you know, that 3/4, according to UN calculations, at least 3/4 were civilians. So that sort of recklessness, because they don't consider Palestinian people as human beings, they don't treat them as human beings, and so that's the characteristic of the attack going on at the moment. But yes, it certainly is to cover up the weaknesses of the current government there, which is notorious for its extremism and open fascism in the way that they talk about their regime. They want to control the entire region. Basically, they'll kill anyone. Iranians, Syrians, Lebanese people. They've really declared war on the region, and this has caused a lot of concern internationally, amongst even Zionists internationally and the Jewish community internationally, because there's a liberal faction of Zionists and of Jewish people that can't tolerate Netanyahu and his colleagues there. So that is at the root of some of the divisions amongst the Israelis themselves.
Taking a look at the regional equation, Jamal Hakeem, really Israel stands out all by itself in a sense. We have to also say the U.S. is in its camp, but there's nobody else at this point with the reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which has been followed by some other Persian Gulf Arab countries like Bahrain. The region is united in some sense. And the two pieces of news that I'm sure Israel, to the dismay of Israel, probably has shocked it have been Hamas, for example, going to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia showing an interest towards warming up to Hezbollah. Does Israel feel like the region is uniting against it?
This might stand for Saudi Arabia right now, as it has frozen all steps of normalization with the Zionist entity, especially after its, let's say, agreement with Iran. However, Israel enjoys very strong ties to Qatar, to the UAE, and also with Egypt. And at the same time, it's infiltrating new zones of influence, especially in Sudan right now. So I don't believe that Israel is, let's say, isolated in the region. We also need not forget about its relations with the Kurds in northern Iraq and in northern Syria. Israel is not isolated in the region. Netanyahu doesn't have good relations with Biden. However, this doesn't affect the strategic relations between Israel and the United States of America. So that's why I believe that the Zionists feel free to go into action, especially by targeting the leaders of Islamic Jihad, that is, and try to, let's say, neutralize Hamas, and try not to target Hamas or other factions in order not to draw them into the conflict, and try to, let's say, focus on the Islamic Jihad for the time being. So that's what the Israelis are trying to do. And they also enjoy good support from some Arab countries, the ones that I cited before, especially on
which Arab countries?
The UAE, for example.
We've seen the UAE react negatively to Israel in some instances, and there also are news that's swirling regarding how the countries involved in the so-called Abraham Accords are maybe thinking twice about that.
But this is only vocal. This is only vocal. It doesn't affect the real relations, security relations, and military relations between the two sides for the time being, especially that they have entered into an agreement with the United States and India to exchange valuable information against what they consider terrorism in the region. So that's why I believe that the UAE declaration was only vocal, just to word of criticism to the UAE good relations with Israel.
Okay. Well, Tim Anderson, when is that red line going to be crossed, given the tenseness that's right now existing there. I mean, we're looking at May now, so you're looking at the record breaking again in terms of the number of Palestinian deaths. You're looking at the raids that are happening on an almost daily basis, if not on a daily basis. Then you have this incident that has happened. Are we looking at a certain red line that will be crossed, and then what the consequences of that would be in terms of getting a big, perhaps, uprising from within the occupied territories, which I don't want to say intifada because many speculated would have happened before. But, you know, given the tense situation that exists now, where would that red line be crossed? In what form?
I don't know that there's a particular red line there, because there is indeed daily activity, daily resistance activity in the West Bank, for example, against the settlements, against the military posts and so on. That's something that you don't understand until you go there and see that how exposed these colonies dotted throughout the West Bank are, and the military garrisons that are supporting them. So, and the unification of the factions on the West Bank, which is extremely important too. And the support they have from Lebanon, from Syria and from Iran. I think the red line for the Israelis would be more if they follow through on their provocations against Iran, for example, because Iran is not going to tolerate, there's a certain level of attack that Iran is not going to tolerate from them, basically, and we've seen some examples of that in the past. But I think that the increasing resistance is adding to the anxiety of the Netanyahu regime, and I think the international pressure that he's under is significant too, because I think there's a likely fifth column within the Israeli international supporters, if you like, that is really would rather see Netanyahu replaced with some sort of more small liberal regime there, which is more concerned about its international reputation. The international reputation and legitimacy of the regime, particularly now that there's 6 independent reports branding it an apartheid regime, is really raising the stakes internationally, and that's a factor that we should put alongside the resistance, the internal resistance.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let me thank Tim Anderson, Director at the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies from Sydney. Thank you for your input. And also Jamal Wakim, thank you so much, Professor of International Relations at Lebanese University in Beirut. With that, we come to an end